Hello, everybody. Today I'm joined by Jessie, and we are in the midst of the series of videos that I make with other coaches who are running actually a coaching business and do this pretty well. I want to give you, the listener, the watcher, the opportunity to learn from them. Everybody has a different approach, and I think everyone has a valid approach when the success that they show is actually the one that many of us aspire to. And Jessie, I think you're like really special in that regard to me, because there's a lot of business education out there, or like marketing education out there, and from how I know you, you've just not subscribed to any of that. You kind of went your own way. And before I ask you any questions around that and get into the topic, I just want to share with people who you are for me. You've been the first three principles coach that I was introduced to as my coach. And we've been working together, I think, for almost a year, something like that, kind of with some breaks in between. And we connected because you've been a dancer, I've been a dancer, and then we went into coaching and it kind of clicked and we were introduced. I think Ankush introduced us at the time. And now we went into this journey. And one thing that I really learned in that journey, I think it was coaching, it was mentoring, was listen to my own voice, a voice that I oftentimes didn't really hear because there was so much noise in my head. There were so many conflicting thoughts and things, or relationship in the midst of it, building my business in the midst of it. And every time we had conversation, I would end up smiling and laughing at one point. That's kind of who you are to me and so much more. We stayed connected from time to time. We checked in. You're a person that I always want to share what's going on in my life, as we just did before this interview, because your very being is so inviting to open up. And I think, I don't know, that's my guess, but I think that's kind of part of the success that you had in your business. So maybe that's a great way to lead into. And if anything else is missing from your story, please fill in the blanks so people know who they are listening to. You're a coach, you're a mentor to people in the Three Principles community, and you've been a dancer. What else is there to say about Jessie?
Just on a real fundamental, bio level, I went to school for psychology because I went to university for psychology because my whole family are all therapists. And I had pursued a degree in dance because, as you and I both have done, I wanted to just have a career as a professional dancer. But I found that I was really under-challenged in that pursuit as far as with my education. So the next best thing, just because I did have that value of wanting to finish my university education, I switched to psychology because I thought, well, this is like, this conversation is like the back of my hand at this point because I grew up in it. And I wanted to get out of college as fast as possible so I could get out and dance. So that is my experience. I did go to school for it. But as I say to every single person that comes to me for mentorship, I don't use it whatsoever. The field of the three principles and the new paradigm of looking at the mind from a more objective perspective is what has brought me freedom. I am never talking down to the field of psychology ever, because any person in the world or modality that will get to somebody feeling better and hopefully being able to then be able to listen to their own wisdom, to me is a wonderful pursuit. On the flip side of that, as a professional dancer, which I was for a decade, I was constantly managing my anxiety on the level of my thinking. So it was keeping me in thought loops. It was keeping me in a cul-de-sac of hell, is what I tell people a lot in my mind. I was constantly working on different tools and techniques to try to manage myself. And it wasn't until I was in the midst of a really deep depression when I had transitioned out of dancing into becoming an agent for one of the top agencies for dancers and choreographers here in Los Angeles. We have an office in Los Angeles and New York. But I went into that field thinking, this is it. This is what I'm going to retire from. And after only a few months, I was really, really upset inside because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, what I had romanticized in my head. So in the midst of that deep depression, I had an insight that completely flipped my perspective of where my suffering was coming from. And it was that everything I was feeling was coming from my thoughts, not the world around me, which completely made me stand up straighter, because I thought, what in the hell did I just hear? Because my entire life I was managing my circumstances thinking those were what was bringing me my suffering. And I rushed out of the shower, called my mom, said, "Oh my God, we've been getting it all wrong." I innocently thought I was the first person to see this. And she said, "That sounds a lot like a man named Sydney Banks, an insight he had. There's a whole field called the three principles. Look into it." And I spent the next year and a half while I was still agenting, using that experience as essentially what I call my master's program, in being in an environment that I had previously deemed the reason for my suffering, to have a completely different experience of it. Now they are my dear friends, and I actually have a coaching program there where I provide sessions for the top talent in the dance industry. And I'm there once a week, and it's so soul-filling because I get to still be involved with the entertainment industry, which lights me up, and be able to provide this perspective that every time after a session, especially a first one, when somebody comes in with me, they go, "I had no idea what to expect, and this just changed my life." And that's after one session. It's unbelievable. When people see the truth of how we work inside, it changes everything on a dime. It's so magnificent. So that's my journey in as short of amount of a time as I've ever done it. So I hope that works for you.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does, and I love hearing the story again, and being reminded of that, as there are so many similarities. Like even there, like you were in the midst of a depression, I was in the midst of a depression. I had the insight in the middle of a club, listening to somebody talking to me, and I just felt nothing. I was completely disconnected. And when a thought dropped into my head saying like, this experience doesn't come from what's going on around, it comes from what you're thinking, and it just in 1 second I was out of it. So that's, yeah, I totally connect with that. So when you had that insight, maybe that's interesting to look at. How did you then transition from learning about coaching into actually signing clients and growing your business? Because I think that's oftentimes people get an understanding of coaching. There might be different modalities. Not everything is using the three principles. They might use a different approach, but very similar in the sense of understanding you can actually influence your experience of life by thinking. And then they come out of the training, and then they're in the, let's call it, real world of you need clients for the business to work. So how did that show up for you? How did that work for you?
So in the field of the three principles, which obviously was defined by Sydney Banks, he had a best friend named Elsie Spittle, who was his best friend before his insight and after. And she has gone on to teach in the field of three principles for what now, almost 50 years. I attended a conference, a workshop up in Salt Spring, which is where Elsie lives and where Sid lived. And this was, again, still while I was in the midst of my agenting life. So I was just literally taking my lunch breaks and my time after work to look in this direction, and then be able to really, I was forced to look at it and be with it while I was in this high intensity, high pressure job, to constantly be kind of have an inner awareness of, oh, you don't know that whole story, Jess, come back, engage, right? Instead of getting really compacted by all of what my mind was throwing at me. Anyway, when I attended that workshop, I shared my depression insight with Elsie at the end of the workshop. She came up, and I was kind of quiet and shy and I'm not in life, but in that experience, I was really kind of more internal because there was so much unlearning happening while I was sitting there. So at the end, she came up to me and she goes, "I don't know you." And I was up there with my mom and her husband and my aunt and uncle. So she goes, "Who are all you people?" Because we were all staying in the back the whole time. And I had this conversation with her, shared with her my insight, and she was so moved by the fact, very similar to you, Moritz. She was so moved by the fact that I had been brought to this understanding via my own experience, that she said, "I want you to promise me one thing." And I said, "What is that?" She goes, "I want you to continue to be mentored by mind," meaning mind of the three principles, mind, consciousness, and thought. So that deeper universal intelligence that's constantly moving through us. "I want you to continue to be mentored by that. Don't go attend a bunch of classes or workshops or readings. Like, do what you're moved to do, but be mentored by that." So, I was like, yes. I had so much commitment to who she was and all of it, that I thought that makes a lot of sense to me. And it was also kind of bizarre for me to be given permission to listen to something that had nothing to do with, education and learning, because that was my life, with going to school for psychology and everything else. It's like you learn everything you can so that way you can memorize it and spit it out and be really good at it. And it was such a different way of being. So I did that. That was it. So I honored myself, and I had the thought that if I am going to listen to an insight that shows me something so new about life, why wouldn't I also honor it when it tells me it's time to leave my 9-to-5 job and start my own business? Why wouldn't I listen to it when it tells me time to let that thing go and move on to this, or reach out to this person? So I started to kind of get onto that. And sure enough, I'll never forget, it was a Wednesday night. My husband is a musician. He came home from rehearsal, and at the time he was doing Wednesday night rehearsals with a band. It was a Wednesday night at 2:00 in the morning when I had what Dr. Bill Pettit says is a 3x5 card from the universe. And it dropped in loud and clear. Give your 30 days on October 1st. And it freaked me out because I'd been kind of eager for that penny to drop. But when the penny dropped, I was like, oh God, really? And then once I just sat with it for a second, I just felt this huge rush of excitement and vibration. And I thought, this is it. And so I did. And I gave that time, gave my 30 days, and beautiful things started to unfold. My boss at the time from the agency said, I know what it's like to build a business. She offered me a little tiny side job to maintain their website, so that way I could just get a little bit of money and not feel like I was completely, no income whatsoever. I mean, it wasn't something that I could live on, but it was something where just for my psyche, it felt nice that something was coming in. And I also want to say for the audience too, that, my husband, if anybody knows anything about the entertainment industry, his, being in the gig economy also is like this. So it's not like I felt this freedom to go because my husband's this like massive moneymaker guitar player. He does very well, and then it all drops out because that's the nature of entertainment, just like it was for dancing for us. So there wasn't this like huge net. Again, it was listening to something deeper that was telling me it's time to go. So that's how it started. And really, that has been the modus operandi to the last 6 years of me running my business.
Beautiful, beautiful. There's something that you said, like having this little side thing that keeps your mind at bay. I think sometimes people hear the stories of like, oh, you need to quit your job and go all in, or you need to do this. And you kind of listen to the noise out there, and then you think like, this is how I should do it. And I've done that. Like I just canceled my work. I had a part-time job to help me fund my training, and I did cancel that. And I then went into, okay, now I had like two dance jobs signs up, and they would provide me with some money so I have a puffer and then I could work. And then COVID happened, so they didn't happen, and there was no money coming in. And then building your business in that environment, I think you can do yourself a favor if you keep it a little bit quieter also on the perceived outside world, right? It's like, yeah, it can help. It can help. So I think that's an interesting side note. And the other thing I heard was just like you honed in to listen to yourself and use whatever you found useful. I'd be curious to hear, like, how did it unfold from there? Because like, did people show up from nowhere, or you met them, or where did you meet them? And slowly, like, people coming in.
Yes. So listen, I'm going to be really honest, and it's going to sound like I know that I have watched videos like this back when I was starting my business. And there would always be something where somebody would say that this magical thing happened and everything changed. And I'd go, how is that ever going to happen to me? Now, that actually did kind of happen to me. And it wasn't, and I don't want anybody listening to think, well, see, now that's going to just write off everything that she just said to me because that one thing happened for her and that's never going to happen for me. The reality is that life unfolds in such a mysterious way. And if the folks listening could really kind of get quiet and know that and we could even listen to Moritz's story because he has something so similar as far as feels a little bit magical. It's above our pay grade on the mysteriousness of how all of this deeper intelligence works. But For the first few months, I definitely kind of plummeted in my mood because I thought for sure that I was going to hang up my dance shoes or hang up my agenting hat. And my email was then going to be flooded the very first Monday after doing that, with everybody going, okay, so what is it that you do? I want to work with you, right? Because I in fact actually had started to do dance workshop mixed with 3P, because I was thinking that would make the most sense moving into this, because it's using what's my background. And then, so I had done that. That was my model. I had created a movement class where it was sitting and learning about 3 principles for a half an hour, and then getting up and doing some movement and embodying it, with my guidance. And I did that for about 3 months. And I had a good little handful of people that were coming and going. And listen, 3 months is nothing to be putting energy into. But by the end of that 3 months, I knew on that deeper level that it wasn't, it just had kind of lost its aliveness, and it wasn't fitting. It felt like it was me kind of trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And I was starting to get people kind of going, that part that you talk about at the beginning, do you ever do one-on-one sessions where we can just talk about that part? And so it was so funny, having been raised by therapists, what was modeled for me was that typical kind of counseling therapist model, right? Where you pay one-off sessions and until you either forever and ever, amen, depending on the therapist, or for some amount of time. So when that was coming to me, at first, when I was building my class, I knew I had a lot of resistance towards it, because I grew up loving being in the conversation of the human condition and psyche, but I had a lot of resistance to being a therapist, even though that's my college education and my background and what literally feels like is in my DNA to help people. But I just had a lot of resistance to it. And so when people started asking me, do you do that? I had some resistance, but because it wasn't lighting me up anymore with the movement class, I thought, turn around, Jess, just face that, see what happens. So it started to blossom, and I had a few clients, enough to where I let go of that side job after working on the website for a few months. And then I had a really divine conversation with somebody, where an old friend, we met for dinner, and she worked at Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow's online magazine, Goop. And she was asking me what I was up to. And I had just started doing one-on-one sessions. I had transitioned out of doing my movement class, was telling her about what I do. And she was asking me, why does that feel different than what I've heard before? And I'm sharing with her, right? And she goes, I want to help you. And she put me in a what they call a Goop guide, where, they put together a bunch of information of different things, and they did a coaching guide with about 10 different folks, and she included me on that. I saw that as the thing that was going to just flip the light switch and make me explode. And it kind of did do that. It took quite a while for that article to come out. So that gap of where I was and when the article was going to come out, that gap was creating a lot of stress for me, because I was, it just kind of stunted me. I thought we were going to have this conversation, do the interview, and then the article would come out a month later. That's not the way it works in publication. So it took quite a while, and it was uncomfortable as hell. I had a few clients, I will reiterate, it was uncomfortable as hell, but at the same time, you learn a lot in those gaps. So that Goop article ended up coming out, and it sustained me through COVID. In hindsight, it was 100% a gift, because I didn't realize how many people go to Goop for advice. So I got a lot of people that were coming to me through that. And I was running my practice in that traditional therapy way, where, people could just come to me one by one, by the end of the session, would you like to do another one? That kind of model. It sustained me. I thrived in a very hard time. I was so grateful to be able to be of service and help people in that time. It was so wonderful. But to just move this story along, by the end of, let's say 2020, we're in 23, end of 21 into the beginning of last year, beginning of 22, I started getting whispers inside that I loved my clients. I loved helping people. It has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with me and my journey. I started getting whispers from inside that I wasn't fulfilled, and I wasn't helping in the way that I wanted to. When I had my first insight in the shower, when I was in my depression, the second thought that came to to mind was everybody needs to know this. And when I had coming to that 5-year point of my practice, I was really feeling like I wasn't helping as many people as I could. So that's been, since then, I have been in massive transition of changing the model of my business and what I do now.
Wow. So divine intervention at one point, but at the same time, here's something that I project into your story, which is the way you're being. And I think that's, like Sydney Banks talks about it, the health of the healer. The more you are like connected to yourself, you could say, or have less on your mind, or are not so concerned with your own insecurities, but really being present to somebody else, it ends up creating magical connections. When you were sharing this story, I was reminded of a client that I made that ended up being my best client in my massage practice. And I met him at 3 a.m. in a club asking for a cigarette. And I touched one point on his back. And he said, like, that's a point that has been hurting since 5 years. Can I have your number? And, like at the time I was looking to grow my massage practice, and I didn't expect to meet somebody in a techno club at 3 a.m. in the morning by just being like, and he's like, you're a massage therapist. Do you know what's my problem? I said, like, it's here. Right. And just worked. So I see that. And at the same time, I believe that there are some practicalities if we don't hear the whispers that we can engage into, which is just start where you are, right? Just start where you are. If there are people that you're already connected with, help them, right? And that's kind of what I hear also in your story, and sharing with the answers that you had and building some clients out of that. Now, what happened for me listening to you is that I really wanted to hear how the story continues. So that's going to be my question. Like, how did it continue? You realized, okay, this way of working, like having one-off sessions and asking, like, do you want another one? And going this way was not the way for you. You wanted to help other people more. Like, what became apparent for you, and where did it go? Where are you now?
Yeah, I wanted to see more significant impact on my clients' lives. I had a lot of resistance to doing packages before because, listen, growing up in a family of therapists, my parents, my family never said anything that was rude about the world of coaching whatsoever. This is all my own experience that was happening inside of me as a little person. But, the field of coaching blew up really like in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I remember when I first started to hear about it, I thought, so there's the field of psychology where you have to do so much education, all these hours for licensing and make no money. And then you make $60 an hour back then, right? And then there's this field of coaching where people are, saying you have to do 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. These people don't have any, typical education. It's kind of like the Wild West, and they're making thousands of dollars off of people. So I had a lot of judgment inside, really old conditioning that I had created. I'm not saying this is about anybody else but me. In my little mind, it didn't make sense to me that there was a field of people who were helping others. So that's positive. But I didn't understand, how is it possible that these people can just take all of their life experiences and help others in that way and charge thousands of dollars versus this other field that looks and is in its own way science-based, and it takes education and all this investment, and then you make very little money, So it didn't make sense to me. It kind of looked like, what? So that residual stuff was in me. It took me a while, even the first year or two of me helping people, to be okay with calling myself a coach, all because of my own judgment inside myself. I just, I called myself an educator, a helper, a mentor. I went all the way around any way I could say it. And then people would go, huh? And then I go, well, I'm coaching people. Oh, okay. It was so challenging for me. So anyway, as I was letting go all of those ideas, and, there was almost this kind of pride in me of like, I'm going to stick to this model of the one-on-one, one by one, I should say, sessions. I don't want people to feel pressured. I don't want people to feel like they're making investments that are, that are going to make them drown. All these different ideas in my head that were stopping me. Potentially valiant, depending again, depending on what perspective you have, but here's what I was noticing. Somebody like you who was fully committed, who came to me, who was open and willing and wanting to hear something different, I could feel that there was an impact being made. People who were coming to me, who were seeing me more through the eyes of a traditional therapist, every time they were coming to me, it was like we were starting from scratch, because they were so used to the model of, okay, it's been this long since I've seen you, so let me tell you about all my problems that have happened since then, right? And I would navigate the conversation in ways that would bring it back, and they would get back into, oh yes, come back into the present, come back, they would learn, but there was no deep footing that was happening. So I realized there is something to this freaking package idea. I realized my own judgment was getting in the way of me truly helping people. So in the shift, I now offer working with people for at least 3 months, starting with a 2.5-day immersion where all we do is a deep dive into the 3 principles, because I'm building the foundation to the house, as you know, building the foundation to the house. Then I work with people, do the one-on-ones every other week for the 3 months. And we have a 1-day immersion at the end. And I'm available for on-the-spot coaching in between. It has absolutely made the biggest difference on the people that come to me. And that's what is most important to me. They are actually seeing, especially by the end of that 2.5 days at the beginning, they are rooted in it, as opposed to it being a nice idea. Like, oh, when I go to Jessie, I feel so much better because I'm reminded of something. Now it's theirs. They have insights that are deeper. It's so that shift has felt like that. Of really, because my referral system, I've got people coming to me based on the last 5 years of how I've been doing something. And the new folks are coming to me and I'm giving them a very different opportunity. And it's a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow at first, I've noticed, because they think they could, can't I just do one-on-ones? I can't afford to do a big chunk. So am I getting a lot of, every time I have a consultation, by the end of that, complimentary consultation, I am getting people every time going, my God, this feels amazing. This is exactly what I need. Am I getting a yes every time? Absolutely not, because people need to take some time to integrate the idea of learning something that is actually going to change their lives, and they can feel it, and that can be scary for people. So they need to go away and bubble on that. And then the investment that comes with it. And believe me, I am not nearly as much as what is possible for a lot of people in the field, but it doesn't matter. It's still a chunk from somebody's life, and they're never considered investing in themselves in that kind of way. And additionally, I realized that I am somebody who is really energetically filled up when I have multiple things going on. So I have that for my business model with my private practice. I have my coaching program at the agency. I am currently working on getting into universities to start doing workshops for dancers and artists. Again, another thing where I'd kind of made up in my mind, yes, dance and dancers and artists light me all the way the hell up. I can do an 8-hour day of sessions and I am so energized by it. But I had made up my mind that, well, dancers don't have a huge, serious flow of income, so I can't really count on that. And so I need to try to find business and income in other ways. And then it finally dawned on me, Jess, that's not how this thing works. You got to turn towards the thing that sparks you, lights you up, and then more will come from that. And sure enough, that is what's happening, as I'm turning towards it and going, okay, let me get curious about this. All of a sudden, opportunities and possibilities are opening up where being able to go into universities and make an impact there is helping several people at once, while also just lighting me all the way up, because I'm speaking to a community of people that I so deeply care about. So that, and I have several other projects that are on the go too. Homeboy Industries, which is a big gang rehabilitation center. Me and the CEO are working on a seminar for corporations. And so just many different things, because that's me. I was putting all my eggs in one basket of having a private practice because I thought that'll bring me consistency. That's how we live in a world that is where, money and all of that makes the world go round. And when I got to that kind of place of boredom and just lack of excitement, that's when I realized realized it's more important for me to look at what are all the pieces that light me up. And this is not for everybody. Some people will want just a private practice and have that be it, and more power to them. But looking at that and going, okay, for me, I love having multiple things going on. My podcast too, and that's what keeps me going now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. There's so much in there. What I feel folks who watch this or listen to this can learn from is, like so many times there's so many good advices out there. Like you find good advice everywhere, but it might not be the right advice for you because your path just might look different. If I was in a handpan retreat last week, and there are two people who came from that who look very likely to be clients of mine in the future. At least when I trust what they said, like I wanna do this, I wanna have more of those conversations. And it was over lunch where there are 140 people hanging around playing instruments. And I was like, okay, let me go there. It was a present. I love to play the handpan. Had nothing to do with business. And then you make connections there, right? And it's so unplanned in so many ways. And still, like what I got from your stories, and that's how I experienced you. Like it sounds to me like you've continuously came back to just being as you are. And that's what provides the connections, the relationships that bring the business and bring the ideas, and trust yourself in pursuing that.
Yes.
I wonder, like, what's your experience? Because you've also worked with coaches, I believe. At least I guess I'm not the only one. So
and therapists.
and therapists, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what is it that you find? Because I guess some of them are also looking to grow their practice or create clients and all of that. How do you help somebody like that? It might look different for everyone.
Yes, it looks different for every single person. Again, my advice is always to take somebody home to themselves, right? What does it look like? What lights you up? Like that's kind of, that's what you and I even did together. What lights you up? Because the reality is so often we have all of this information, as I kind of illustrated in my story. I had all this information inside of myself about what working with artists does for me. I knew it, and I was constantly negotiating with it. My mind negotiated with it over and over again. It would come up and then I'd go, but that's not possible. I won't get to a place of being able to buy a house that way. Like literally that was the sentence in my brain, And so there's, that's the deal, is starting to get some discernment around what voice is going on inside. Anyway, so when I'm talking to people, when I'm working with people who are in business development, number one, getting comfortable in the fact that it is going to be uncomfortable and seeing deeply into what that actually is, right? And that's a total different tangent of a conversation. That's a 3 principles conversation. But starting to to get comfortable in that, which people do quite easily once they realize that they always know what to do on a moment-to-moment basis. But it's when they're time traveling to the future that confuses them, which was what was confusing me. How will I buy a house if I actually do what makes me light all the way up, which is working with artists? So really getting really present and in the conversation going, what do you naturally do all the time and you're not getting paid for it? Because people have that. Every single person who I'm talking to has that, where they're doing things in life and they go, oh God, I love this. And then they go over here and then they go, okay, now I got to figure out how to build my business. And you go, wait a second, look at what lights you up. Turn towards that. Turn your gaze towards that. What would it look like if that's what filled your days and you got paid for it? And all of them just go, that would be amazing. Start there. Then when you start there and start to get curious about it, then your mind starts to bring way more possibility. Like me working with agencies, working with universities, working with dance companies, all of that direction I'm going in, right? None of those ideas came to me because I would go, God, I love talking to dancers. And I would immediately negotiate with it and go, but that's not a good way to make a good income. So I never even reached the point of possibility in my mind. But as soon as I kind of woke up to, that's what lights me all the way up. turn that way, get curious about it. And all of a sudden, ideas started to come to mind about what was possible. And it has been wonderful, because that's us. Same with my private practice working one-to-one. I was on a walk one day and I thought to myself, do you want to just completely pivot away from that? Do you want to not work one-on-one with people at all? Is that just off the menu? And everything in me was like, no, that's not right. Okay. So is it the way you're doing it? Yes. Very clear. Yes. Because I just kept getting so bummed. I had a good chunk of clients like you that just came to me already like so ready, that I was feeling the impact and watching the evolution in such a beautiful way where it was great. I had you guys as reference points of, okay, if somebody doesn't come to me already totally ready to shift and change and wanting to have a different experience of themselves and their life, how do I help people who are really lost in the sauce of themselves and give them a structure that will give the same impact of these folks who've come to me totally clear that they're ready to dive in and take a deep dive and ready to change. And that's when I started to kind of go, okay, I literally have to. And that's when I woke up to all of that residual old conditioning around all of my judgment of the packaging and the bigger amounts of money and all of that stuff. And then the fear that came with, what if people can't afford it? And what if this, what if that? That's when that Pandora's box opened. So it's like every time you kind of get curious about things and you see why you've stopped yourself and you realize, holy crap, that's a conclusion I've drawn based on so many different variables that none of it has to do with my own truth. And what my own truth is I want to see people get fundamentally rooted in the truth of who they are so they can navigate life without me and being guided by their true selves, which means I have to create a container where I help them keep their gaze in that direction. I have to. And so it immediately kind of woke me up to all of my BS that was keeping me from moving in that direction.
Can you put like in a few sentences, when you say who you truly are, what does that mean for you?
This is the thing that comes to mind, and it was through a big insight that came to me a year ago. I am the awareness of everything that comes and goes. I am this deep, expansive, it's like even using the word I am is hard to say, but it's just, I know that deep inside of me, I am this limitless energy that is bearing witness to everything that comes and goes in my mind, everything that comes and goes in my life. And I get caught up in the everything that comes and goes sometimes. And then I remember that I am just bearing witness to it.
That's powerful. It's very powerful. And it's basically the place we always be guided back to look at. And it doesn't matter what we do, as that's what I'm getting from the conversation, my own experience. It doesn't matter what we do, that's what we're gonna look back at and realize that most of the problems we make, be it in business, be it in relationship, be it in our money creation, be it in health, fitness, whatever it is that we're pursuing, that's kind of where we get astray. And when we look back in that direction, there's always something that's going to come our way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jessie, I feel like ending it here. We kept a promise to each other that this is going to be a longer conversations than the other ones. And I love that, as I always get something from listening to you and be reminded of what you just said at the end. How, like after this conversation, people want to reach out to you, want to connect with you, how do they do that? How can they get in contact with you?
Yes, you can find me anywhere and everywhere with What Moves You with Jessie. My website is whatmovesyouwithjessie.com. My podcast that's released weekly is What Moves You with Jessie on streaming platforms, social media handles, everything. So What Moves You with Jessie.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for sharing your journey with us and some of the tips and insights you had around being you and being your business. Kind of ties very well into what I'm creating.
Look at that. Perfect.
Wow.
Not even
like
planned.
That's what I got. That's really what I got. Being you, and from that place, creating your business. That's what I got from our conversation. Thank you so much, Jessie.
You are so welcome. And I'm so glad that's what you got, because there is nothing more powerful than you being you, turning towards that and seeing what comes to mind from there, because you will always get the next indicated step if you can see that as the most powerful resource you can ever have.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you so much.